welcome to Beer and Philosophy. Here's my friend Yoonseo, and today we're going to get his take on what is philosophy. So, cheers.
Philosophy is interesting, right? Because it's trying to combine a lot of general concepts like wisdom, logic, purpose, meaning, intention, and our very own existence in this world. So I think if we look at it from that combination-oriented perspective, we'll see that it has a lot to do with general principles and trying to pursue general truths. And I feel like a lot of philosophical texts try to bring order, with these concepts, out of self-reflection and reflection in their throughout their lives.
Okay. So it's like a distillation of sorts, then? Would you say? So you talk about trying to get that like general principles.
That's right.
And so that makes sense, right? So we're trying to figure out of my individual experiences. I try and notice patterns, which I think that humans are generally pretty good at noticing patterns, pattern recognition.
Yeah.
Sometimes too good. We over value. We see things that aren't actually there sometimes. But so we distill these patterns out of our experience, and then that becomes our philosophy of sorts. Ideally, we then introspect about that, or like apply some logical framework to it, and try and dissect it and see, does this actually apply? Maybe in an ideal world, we do some experiments about it to see, okay, I think here's my hypothesis. Does this actually pan out? But then, is there an element of incorporating other people's experiences as well? So it's not just my own myopic view.
That's right, and that's a good insight you point out, because one of the cornerstones of philosophy is definitely trying to align and mesh your own perceived truths with others, because there you can clear up your own misconceptions about these general principles, and in pursuit of course, the truth. And I think that's really important, because philosophy is generally not about remaining within your own domain of beliefs, but rather trying to find what is true, because what is true will help you get the consequences you want.
Ideally, right? There's maybe a philosophical question there about which we can get into later, of what is truth. And while you were talking, I was thinking, oh God, it's going to come up like Jordan Peterson, Anyway, we can get into that another time. That's interesting as well. But so this idea of an iterative process, that it's not just my own experimentation, but also I'm taking into account other people's experiences, because I'm trying to distill as much as possible what is the actual truth out there, and why is it helpful to know what's true? Do you think?
Because it gives you the ability to simulate the world more accurately. And for me, that's been kind of the defining perspective of consequentialism. Not the sort of consequentialism where people say the end justified a means, but more so in the fact that you're able to accurately see the entire stream of events that follow a decision, instead of being short-sighted, or instead of being too idealistically long-sighted, right?
Okay.
So yes, accurately simulating the world is one kind of end stone of philosophy for.
Okay, and is it fair? Because so me hearing that, I think, the reason we'd want to simulate the world is because of those decisions. So we want a given outcome,
Exactly.
And right. So it's we're trying to achieve something, and of the endless array of possibilities that we could strive toward, we're okay, I think I want this outcome. There's a deeper question about the wisdom of, what thing we're going after. And then once I've selected a goal, there's what's the path there?
Exactly.
And so being able to simulate, as you said, like, okay, in dialectical behavior therapy, we say run the tape to the end, meaning like, imagine, okay, what are all the steps? Where would this actually lead? What are the pitfalls that might come up? All that sort of stuff. But so all of that's about trying to actually accomplish our goals. Is that fair? I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's an interesting, I would say, for me, there's been a big emphasis on the pragmatism of that path and the goal itself, in that you have to be very realistic about what's actually going to happen and realistic about the goal itself as well. A lot of people may have good intentions, but they're too idealistic, and the path gets, quite straight and into volatile territory.
Right. Okay. So there's a risk of being kind of too theoretical. Maybe is that the thing where people because there's an idealism to theory, like high level thing where it's like, oh, like the math should work or whatever. It's so it's so beautiful and elegant. This theory, so therefore it should work. And then reality is like,
reality.
No.
The thing about theory is that it's almost like it operates within its own vacuum of presumed factors, and then the real world is so much more complex. And so I think philosophy has a lot to do with understanding the broad scope of the real world, right? And by thinking about the breadth of the world, you develop a bit of I think humility in how little you may understand about the uncertainties.
Yeah, I think this is huge, right? So this, you were with Socrates talked about this idea as well, right? Like, the only thing I know is I know nothing, that kind of idea, right? So this humility, which I think, interestingly, a lot of people this gets to the thing, like, I think when the average person thinks about philosophy, they don't tend to think in the ways that we're talking here now. They tend to think of it as this kind of obscure academic discipline, which, certainly the things that are talked about there are of interest, at least to me, and yet the maybe kind of stereotype is that it's this like airy-fairy, metaphysical kind of realm of things. Yeah.
Along the lines of, in the pursuit of goodness, we must identify the good parts of what is good. Like fuzzy stuff like that, right? Sure. And that actually brings up a point I wanted to mention before, which is, remember we were trying to get to a goal, right, in our application of philosophy, and trying to accurately simulate the entire path there. Sometimes it's what you set out to do itself that starts off with the wrong notions, because you have to think about the core question of what is actually good. That's a powerful question.
Right. So those kind of like whatever metaphysical questions do matter. It's important, and we don't want to fall into the trap of making these assumptions. So I was thinking about this recently. This idea that, like, let's say that, think of global society, whatever, the contemporary human species, and imagine in some sort of like idea space, whatever, we're heading in with a certain momentum, a certain inertia in a certain direction. And I think overall, my impression would be that generally our direction is pretty positive from a certain perspective. We've seen lots of movement on lots of important things over the last, say, 100 years or whatever, or longer. And yet it's like, okay, so we're headed this direction. So there's a lot of momentum carrying us that way. And yet we don't want to get locked into the thinking that, well, that's that's progress. Because maybe we should re-examine everything and decide, oh no, actually we should go back this way. And even though there's a lot of like sunk costs, because now we'd have to stop going this way and switch course and come backwards. We don't want to, just miss out on those potential goals that are seemingly again in opposition to our current direction.
And let me bring up 2 points here. One is about trade-offs, and it's so important because I find that a lot of people, when they're pursuing a simple goal, they tend to, or rather they risk falling into the trap of thinking in terms of that goal in black and white, and they think, well, that can only be good, and where it's just a fight of the good against the evil, and I know this is good quite powerfully, so therefore everything that opposes this must be bad, right? And then they kind of get locked into that mentality, and they don't see the trade-offs because in their pursuit of whatever goal, well, there's a lot of sacrifices. A specific one in particular would be like the idealism of, let's say, open borders, right? And the good idea of that is just trying to let people come and be happy and pursue opportunities, right? But, well, political assassinations become easier. My goodness, criminals definitely come in, and a lot of people are kind of sheltered within their own domain. They don't understand the real dangers of the world, and well, there's your trade-offs.
Okay, so you just had to go there with the real life political thing.
I did.
So we can get more into the nuances of that in a future video, perhaps. So I want to remain at least at the moment on this higher theoretical plane.
Sure.
But so the idea of trade-offs, of opportunity costs, that as I'm doing one thing, I'm closing the door to many other possibilities by doing so. And oftentimes idealism might drive me to make certain choices that actually have a lot of negative outcomes that I'm not accounting for. What I guess in economics we might call externalities, that either I'm not directly paying for or might not even be aware of.
That's a big one. Because if you're only getting the good parts of this decision that seems black and white good, then you actually only see the good parts. So it's like confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, wow, I'm just seeing the good parts. I knew this was a good decision, and then other people are suffering.
Sure. Yeah. So right. So perhaps in a future video again we can talk about this idea of trade-offs, externalities, opportunity costs. Like there's a lot there we could unpack. And also you just mentioned confirmation bias. So I mean, speaking about different biases that we have, that's probably profitable as well.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah. So it seems like the idea of philosophy, and so what do you think about this idea that a lot of people perceive philosophy as this like very theoretical,
yes,
almost
that's
like
quite the stigma. That's quite the stigma, right? It's bad to put it simply, because
is that a moral judgment?
I think it definitely misguides people, and it should. And to be fair, it's portrayed like that because a lot of texts can be very theoretical in the philosophical space, but I think a more healthy perspective of philosophy has to do with critical thinking and valuable insights that can be applied generally to our lives.
Yeah. This is sort of my idea about what is philosophy. It's the love of wisdom, philosophy, and wisdom, which we can get into again. What does that mean? I think simply it's about making effective decisions, meaning of those goals we might pick, picking appropriate goals, helpful goals that will actually get me what I really want, or that sort of thing, and then knowing that path, right? So to my mind, that kind of encapsulates what wisdom is. We can unpack it more, but and so to my mind, philosophy is eminently practical, or should be, or could be. And I think there is value to that, what we might call like basic philosophical thinking, the kind of the deep theoretical stuff. There is value in that, definitely. And at the end of the day, it's got to come back to some sort of practical application. I shouldn't say it has to, but it's beneficial if it does. So yes, I think that's an important. Those are important points there. So okay, well, so perhaps we can wrap up this here, and then we can speak on some other topics.
Sure.
So cool.
Well, that went more smoothly than anticipated.